Hello. So I've talked about this quite a few times at NatSCA, but I'm going to do it again just to kind of rub it in. But anyone that's not met me before, I'm Jazmine. I'm a taxidermist and I only work with animals that have died from natural causes. Can I just check, do I use, yeah. And in my presentation, I'm going to talk about the benefits of using props to explore how taxidermy is created and the benefits of doing this. Some of the ways that I've been doing it at 2 museums over the past year. And for those who don't know, taxidermy is created by sculpting the prepared skin, the prepared or tanned skin of an animal onto a sculpture using a variety of materials. I use traditional methods and materials that are very similar to how many of the objects within historic collections are made. Originally, skins were stuffed, hence the word stuffed animals, with various materials. But then in the 19th century, taxidermists started creating solid forms to build their skins onto. And then this is the process of mounting rather than stuffing, and it gives a more accurate, lifelike type of taxidermy. I don't have as many props as I normally take to talks, but I've got this mink, so I'm going to pass it round, and I'll explain him in a minute a bit more. Don't poke yourself in the eye with his tail. Yeah. Okay. So this is what goes inside a mammal. It's a wire armature bound with soft wooden fibre called wood wool, and then a cotton thread is wrapped around it, and sometimes the skull is used, which you can see on the mink. And then the details of the face and the feet are sculpted in clay. This one has epoxy so that it's durable for talks. And over the past year, I've been working with Hastings Museum Art Gallery and the Booth Museum of Natural History to create workshops for children. Through these workshops, we aspire to inspire young people to see the value in natural history collections and the natural world, explore positive ways to care for our planet, to stimulate minds, and to engage with children that might not usually go to museums or see themselves in a STEM career using museum objects. So one of the projects I've been doing for Hastings Museum is I have made a selection of school offers for primary school children. Sorry, the noise. For primary school children on key subjects, key stage subjects. Subjects are habitats, evolution, skeletons, and climate change. These workshops are formulaic and designed to be user-friendly so that a member of the museum staff who doesn't have to be an expert on the subject has a script. There's a worksheet for the children to follow for some of the workshops, and then a selection of objects from the collection I've selected and restored and cased up into acrylic cases to use alongside the workshops. But the twist to these workshops is that I've added something that may differ to other workshops that are usually run in museums, because at the beginning of every workshop, we ask them, what is taxidermy? So I think sometimes we can often jump into teaching using these objects without first explaining how and why these objects are here, why they're useful, who the animal was, where it came from, how it died, and why is it not rotten into a pile of worms. And sometimes that's also because those teaching using taxidermy don't actually know themselves how it's made. And it doesn't have to be a really thorough understanding, but just a basic one is good. And teaching volunteers or visitor assistants what's inside taxidermy can really open up the doors of a museum to those who might find it simply scary going inside. So on the worksheets, there's a little, on the worksheets, there's like a little bit for children to fill in either at school when they get back or during the workshops about what taxidermy is. And I also created some of what I call exposed taxidermy objects. I made a mammal and a bird for Hastings Museum. And I created these for the works that are in the museum's collection. So these workshops were funded by various different avenues, but once these objects are in the collection, they can essentially use them for whatever they want. This is the other side of the squirrel. With these, I'd say the mammal is more successful than the bird. It's really robust and it can handle some tough love. And the one that's being passed around has been handled by hundreds of hands, and it's still the same as it was when I first made it. And this squirrel has been used for school workshops so far that I've not been present at, but I did, for Earth Day, I got the opportunity to take these objects out myself, and the squirrel was a big hit. And for the Wild Escape for Earth Day, I ran 2 different workshops at Hastings Museum. One was dissecting owl pellets. So the taxidermy props were pretty irrelevant, but I still wanted to talk about it. So I got them out at the beginning of the session, talked about how taxidermy was made, and then we got stuck into the owl pellet dissection. But it was really nice to see people interacting with the squirrel during sessions. I love this image because as I was talking to this girl about the bones inside the pellet, she was just absent-mindedly stroking the squirrel at the same time. And I love this too. And it was just nice to see people interacting with the squirrel in the sessions. And it gave them something else to talk about if the younger kids were getting bored of picking apart the owl pellets. It's a bit of a tangent to my talk, but doing owl pellet dissection was amazing because it really got the family groups having to work together. And it was nicer than it just being something that was focused very much on the children. The parents really got involved and all the feedback was positive, like a day we'll all remember kind of thing. And it's a bit, and I also make bird exposed pieces, which I would say are actually a bit less successful because they're not as simple as the mammal half prep kind of piece. Because of the way a bird is created, the feathers are directly attached to the bone. So if you remove too much of the skin, you essentially don't have anything left apart from the balsa wood body inside. So although something like this is great at showing what's under the skin of taxidermy, I think it's better for older children and adults. But if the main goal is to simply articulate the taxidermy as a craft in a really simple way, I would choose a mammal. Also, birds are more fragile. But if you don't have the budget to make something like this, or to get something like this made, I'm going to be radical and say, do you have anything in the handling collection that you could rip apart a bit, take a bit of the side off of? If you're obviously going to do that, wear PPE, because the other thing about taxidermy, we don't know, if you don't know where it's come from, you have to be careful there's not hazardous chemicals inside it as well in handling collections. So that's the benefit of having something made, a new thing made. But if you're going to take the side off something, put it in an acrylic case, and it doesn't really matter which piece you take apart, whatever's inside will be interesting for the visitors, or even something that's going to be thrown away, it's being deaccessioned. But I also did a very relaxed general what is taxidermy kind of event, which we called the Dead Zoo, because we read The Dead Zoo by Peter Donnelly, inspired by Natural History Museum in Dublin, as part of the event. But for this, it was aimed at preschool children, but the age range was more like, up to 7, really. But there were lots of babies there. And I kept the environment really relaxed and informal, so it wasn't intimidating. I passed around all of the objects so family groups could really get a close look. And objects that were really great for kind of sensory seeking, really young children, was simply a balsa wood bird body, or just a little bag of wood wool that I used to make for the mammal bind-ups, and also just some old acrylic eyes. You can get really cheap eyes from eBay. If you had a little matchbox of eyes, it's really cool getting the kids to have to figure out which animal they're from. And you can see here, I have a taxidermy fox called Brian, who I take along to museums and to schools. I made him over 10 years ago. He's very robust. And on the underside, I made sure his seams are visible and a part of the bind-up is exposed. So if you end up having a child that's still scared, I can pick him up and then they can see on the underside that he's not real. He's not, meat or all of the other things they imagine. And then they kind of relax. And I think museums, I also know exactly where he died, how he died, his whole kind of history after he died. So I can give this information in a really relaxed way to children that are also worrying that I've killed it and things like that. And museums can be really intimidating, and I think it's really valuable when young children have the opportunity to feel relaxed in a museum environment and feeling like they can make choices to pick something up or touch something, and it builds confidence. So I try not to be too precious with my approach to how Brian is handled. So in this image, you can see I've just kind of left him in the middle of the room. And this is a quote from one of the parents who visited the workshop about her daughter. This really brought the museum to life for her. She was later able to walk around the exhibits and hypothesize about how they were made. She's been speaking about it with everyone she meets. She's normally very shy, but I think she really appreciated that she has knowledge and experience that most adults and children don't have. And then this is my partner Benjamin, who read The Dead Zoo, because by this point my voice was nearly gone. but I wish there were more books like this. And if anyone wants to publish a children's storybook with me, please come and let me know. This is the book for anyone who's interested. Talking to children about taxidermy also gives them a chance from a very young age to talk about death. When we talk to children about death, it's often blurry and vague, but I believe through talking about death of animals, we can explore more gently the harsh reality of our own demise, and hopefully the realization that animal life is fragile and has an end will sow the seeds of respect for nature and the need to protect it. I'm going to skip through some. But this is a picture of my son, and he's grown up with knowledge of death from a very young age, but it's not desensitized him. It's the opposite. He's incredibly empathetic of animals. He's a vegetarian of his own choice, and he shouts at cars to slow down. But taxidermy, a craft, the objects would not be here if it weren't the skills of a taxidermist. However, it's almost not a craft, because when we look at taxidermy, ultimately, you're not supposed to see the craft or the maker behind the illusion. What you see is the animal. And so they can be quite uncanny objects that can make viewers uncomfortable. And for children, these objects can sometimes be a bit scary, and knowing how they're made can really remove that fear, and it's almost like they can get over it, move on, and actually you can do the teaching that you want to do using the objects afterwards. I'm really whizzing through now, sorry. Another part of the project that I've been doing is a project called Discovering Our Dioramas at the Booth Museum for Natural History, which is also funded by the Esme Fairbairn Foundation. And part of phase 1 is they're doing lots of research about how they can, make their collections more interesting for younger children. And I'm hoping the Booth Museum will come next year to talk about the whole project. One of the things we did was I did a bind-up workshop where kids got the opportunity to make their own bind-ups. But the research they did a before and after, which you can kind of see in this image, where kids were asked, about taxidermy before, and then how they felt about it after the workshop. The downfall of this bit of research was all the kids that signed up for it already knew about the museum, so they were comfortable with taxidermy. But I would love to do this with a school group where you have children that aren't normally exposed to these kind of experiences or environments. It's a really great workshop to do. It's very messy. That's my main word of warning. And then we did a walk around the gallery and we looked at the taxidermy, and we didn't just talk about the animals. We talked about if they could see the seams, how they were painted, how they thought they were made. And it really opens the door to, children being able to engage with the animals on a different level. How long have I got? About 5 talks in one there, so I'm just going to skip some. Okay, so I'm often asked why there's an upcoming trend at the moment in young women taking up taxidermy. When I started in 2007, there really were very few well-known female taxidermists, and it's basically just representation. People seeing other women doing taxidermy, and even in The Simpsons last month, they profiled taxidermist Alice Markham from LA in The Simpsons, which is very cool. And it's important to me to work with schools and to work with children for them to get to see me as a female taxidermist. I represent an uncommon career choice as well, and exposing children to these kind of careers, any museum careers, is an exciting thing. Okay, so things you can do. Obviously, a permanent display showing the process of taxidermy is ultimate. But in most cases it's not possible. Talk to visitors. If you go on my website and follow the section that says videos, there's videos on there that I've made for various museums like NHM Dublin, Ram Museum and others, Horniman Museum. Feel free to use them, share them with your volunteers, send them out in your emails to people that work in the museum. And they're made for families, so they're not gruesome or anything if you're scared of that. Get props made for the museum, or just something cheap like acrylic eyes, as I say, some wood wool, it's really great. Do interactive taxidermy workshops, have photos, illustrations on display or as a handout, and maybe that's something I could do with NatSCA, is make like a PDF handout that you can print off and fold up and give out to visitors. I recommend seeking your local taxidermist. See if they might come and either give a talk to museum staff or the public. and I'm happy to connect people to local taxidermists that I might know. And most taxidermists, I say, don't like public engagement, but they might just come and like have a cup of tea with your volunteers or something. And when a child meets a taxidermist or a curator or anyone working in a museum, it can open up so many opportunities. I never met a taxidermist as a child, but I know if I had done, I would have been doing this from a very annoyingly young age. So. Sorry, that went really far.
No, you're brilliant. Yeah. So we've just got time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, if anyone's got any.
Thanks, Jazmine. Interested in your slide with Brian the Fox. It was great name. And he said there was a kid and he was afraid of the fox. And once we showed him the scene on the other side, the kid knew the fox presumably wasn't alive and item. Then wasn't afraid anymore. And I had an interaction with human adults and showing them behind the scenes taxidermy at one stage. And they're artists, and one of them had a total freak out at the taxidermy because it was dead, and they found that creepy. And I just wondered if patterns and when with adults in particular, what is it they wince at the most? Is it that they're afraid of the animal, or they find the taxidermy creepy?
I think that sorry, the question is, what do people generally find about taxidermy that makes them feel uncomfortable? Is that kind of right?
Yeah.
But my answer is it depends on the people, so different cultures as well. So Brian was actually named by a load of a school group. I think they were around 6 or 7, really young, and they were mostly Bangladeshi, and they'd never stroked, a lot of the children had never even stroked a dog, and they were quite frightened of stroking a dog, but they all stroked Brian and they named him Brian. I really wanted them to give him a really exotically beautiful, anyway, Brian is a great name for him, and they, you know, and it really changed. It was an experience for them through using a dead animal, which, you know, they'd not had before. So it does depend on who it is. A lot of adults, not to generalize, I'd say like generally like older women, they're just kind of grossed out by it. I don't know if it's because, you know, during the 80s there was quite an anti-taxidermy situation where a lot of museums actually hid their taxidermy, threw it away. In some cases, and you know, because of our laws changing and our understanding of hunting, and it's got taxidermy, rightfully so, it's got a really bad reputation. So I think there's that thing, there's the fact it's a dead animal, but I honestly think if you're quite honest about that, especially with children, you say, yes, it's dead, but don't worry, it's a sculpture that someone has made using the skin of an animal. And if you talk about it like upholstery, like because that's what it is, you know, you've got a sculpture and you're upholstering it, but you're not using fabric, you're using skin, and that skin's been turned into leather. So you kind of give it these craft processes. It really does change it from dead animal to craft sculptural object. Yeah, so it's a mixture of different reasons and stuff like that. So I hope that answered.
Just to advertise that book that Jazz was talking about, the Dead Zoo, you should all have it in your museum shop. It's now available in chewable board version as well as a slightly more.
And the children loved it, because when do they get to read a book about death like that? You know, it's great.
Thanks so much.